talking with Bill, half hour Bill Loebs, and I have alternate, let's give a hand. Bill Loebs, Michigan's premier cartoonist, and I have two title slides because I couldn't make up my mind what to call the show. The Comic of the Future. 45 years of Bill Loebs art and stories from Power Comics to Big Green Folks, 1977 to 2022. When I realized that, 45 years. And then the alternate version is I Shall Eat the Brains of Men, because that was the first image that was seared indelibly into my brain in 1977. This was the comic book here. Power Comics #2, and I was going to the Fantastic Con at 9 Mile Middle Belt at San Souci Hall, and I met Mike Gustovich, who did the Cobalt Blue. I met TKC Brennan, and I met Skip Williams, who was the creator of Night Witch, and I met everybody associated with Power Comics except for Bill. For some reason, I didn't meet Bill until the 80s. When I joined the club with my comic book, and I called Bill up and I said, hey, I'm in the club now. And he promptly came downtown Detroit to visit me and read my comic. And,
well, you also said, well, I had one story. I had one story in me, one book, and they've hired me now. And how do you actually do a continuing comic? And I was in the middle of sort of figuring that out. I really hadn't. I had like one good story in me too. I had my first years of me being chased by a bear, and then what do you do next?
That was one heck of a bear chase.
It was a really long bear chase, and it's interesting that I thought that the way you actually do a bear chase is to make the bear get bored, because he just gets halfway through across the river and McAllister is done for, and then the bear turns around and goes away. So it certainly was something that people were not expecting, and I think that's what you want to do in a comic, is you want to.
You parlayed that into how many issues of Journey?
31.
31. And I promised Bill not to bring up Wonder Woman, which is a character he totally ruined. We won't talk about that. They never were able to do anything with Wonder Woman after Bill, or Hawkman, or Flash, all his famous stuff. But you started, I wanted to start, because we were talking on the phone, you started with I Shall Eat the Brains of Men and the Comic of the Future. This indelibly stayed in my mind. The Mask, here's the Mask, who is obviously an Eisner-inspired, Spirit-inspired character. And this was your first like solo illustration work that was published? Because you did backgrounds in the first issue of Power Comics.
Yeah, and the thing is, I had a script that was produced for me by TKC Brennan for the Maxx.
How did he write scripts? Pretty detailed and
pretty detailed, yeah. And but what they decided to do was they wanted to, instead of, comics have been done in several different sizes. You probably don't know that because they all ended up the same size after they were printed, more or less. And so and you should also point out that Power Comics was being produced by a couple of guys who were so completely sure that they knew what they were doing that it was impossible to tell them anything. And they decided that they wanted to do this Golden Age size, which is, instead of being they're 10 by
there's a white strip on the bottom. I was wondering about that. Was that because they they were gonna make a wider comic.
I bet that, it was also Power Comics was being funded, well,
Through chicanery.
yes.
This was 1977.
And there was, first they embezzled $25,000 from one of their father-in-laws, and then they, and then they were selling dope on the campus.
It's a comic book publishing is a proud tradition, Mike. Now you were telling me that you were studio mates with Mike Gustovich, who did the Cobalt Blue, and was that did your studio turn into the Power Comics headquarters, or did you move to a house?
Well, we had two, I was sort of had a drawing board set in the back of my parents' apartment, but they rented two houses, one for the artists, and then one for the
Highland Publishers.
Yes. My publisher Tim decided that, and then we had like a house mother, kind of this guy that Tim had adopted, and he was a heroin addict, and Tim had decided that he was going to break him of the heroin habit by having him smoke dope. And if you've ever seen Rio Bravo, where John Wayne cures Dean Martin of being an alcoholic by having him drink beer, you know where Tim got the idea. And so we had, I think there were 5 of us originally in this. Bruce Bennett and Joe Zabel and me and Mike Gustovich, and then this other fellow. And very early one morning, the heroin addict ran away. He just looked at what was happening in that studio, and he said, I'm not gonna lower myself to being involved in this, which goes to show you that even heroin addicts have some sort of self-respect. But we stayed, which just goes to show you.
Now, you were saying you learned things from Mike. Mike was the more advanced, technically inked with a brush, and of course he went on to freelance. Joe Zabel ended up illustrating American Splendor with Gary Dumb and Zabel and Dumb and Zabel. But you were learning things from Mike.
I was, and we were all learning things. The idea was originally that Mike had a much more mainstream kind of style, and Mike had been training himself for years and years and years to, like, a lot of the guys that pencilers from like Marvel Comics, like John Buscema, for example, would have they would actually, on the backs of their drawings, they would do warm-up drawings. So if you bought their originals at conventions, then you could ink those background drawings, and you would have like real professional things to ink on. So that's,
that I remember, because I met Skip Williams, who did the Night Witch, and she's on the first cover. Now they had some originals they were discussing with the heads on the back.
Yeah.
Now, he didn't hang out with you hippie communal house people.
Well, he had like a real job and an actual family.
He had a real job, he was a straight,
And, yeah.
and he was a school teacher, right?
He was a school teacher, and so, yes, so.
But his artwork would come in, and how did you ink parts of this?
Yeah, we would, cause part of the whole deal here was that we were supposed to be running, Power Comics exactly like it was Marvel Comics. Just like the bullpen.
Like crusty bunkers.
Yeah, except that, the difference was that, the artists in the Marvel bullpen actually were being paid money. And they were willing to put up with a lot more.
Well, you said that there was some pay, and then it kind of trailed off into.
Well, it started out being, we got, room and board and $100 a month. So that was the high point. And, but we were, you know, I mean, we desperately wanted to be in comics, and that seemed to be the way you broke in. And the fact that nothing really made sense. I mean, when you really looked at it, but you know, every profession has elements of chaos at its root, and you just, whether it's, you know, the Army or the Democratic Party, or, you know, any of this, anything.
Can I ask you now, of these, they were trying to go monthly. Were you involved in the production more or less of everything that they put out, or certain issues? Were you, for example, I have Northern Lights, I don't think I have a slide for that, but were you involved in the Northern Lights issue, which was the issue 4, I believe?
Well, Northern Lights was actually produced by a guy in Canada, I think.
Okay.
And I think he was just producing it all on his own, and Tim was promising to publish it.
So some things would come in. You mentioned the ElfQuest artwork came in.
Yeah, that.
That was laying around on the kitchen table or something.
Yeah, it just arrived, and it was so obviously, you know, spectacularly good, and so Tim decided to steal it. Now he didn't.
Or not give it back.
Yeah, and so he was gonna do Fantasy Quarterly, and he said, so Bill, you're going to be the editor of that. Well, what do I do with it? I mean, you know, it's done. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, doesn't it? It stops, and then, you know, I'm not sure exactly what I was supposed to be doing as an editor, and of course, Ed shared with us that he hadn't paid the Peonies anything, and in fact was not planning on returning the artwork.
And Richard had to kind of
he came
break into
well,
the lair.
Yeah, after everybody went home, I went over and Bruce Bennett had been sort of stranded in there. He was, see, I was 27. Tim was 27. His partner was 27. The other 3 guys were 23, and then Bruce Bennett was 18. And
he drew what?
He was more or less, he was really talented, but he was more or less an inker for this. And the idea was that we were all going to be, you know, we were all going to be rich. You know, con men, basically, if they're good con men, believe their own cons. And and Tim had talked himself into the idea that Marvel and DC were going to be broken up by the government. And that would have given us a space to step in as the new mainstream books, which is why we had to do mainstream things. Even though none of us were suited for doing mainstream things, we had all been doing our own work.
Well, that's the interesting thing, because I read these just as I was outgrowing Marvel comics, superheroes, things I bought on the newsstand. But I had not yet, I was 1977, would have been 15, just starting high school in the fall of '77. And I had not yet bought undergrounds. I could start buying undergrounds a little bit later. I was tall enough, and
Yeah.
Classic Movie and Comic Center didn't mind going into the adult section and buying.
CC.
Yeah, CC, and we down in the basement down there, and then they moved to Livonia, which was actually close to where I used to live. But anyway, all that. But this was like this perfect ground level, and this was. I read there's an editorial in here about, and this is from Ed Langham. Welcome to the second issue of Power Comics. With this issue, Power Comics is proud to introduce a brand new spinning format to the American comic book. My friends, you now hold in your hands the comic book of the future. That was your quote. And it's because it's a glued binding, like you would get at a
big boy
auto show, yeah, or like a, and he says here, he says that by the end of the year, one of the big two is gonna go stapleless. But that didn't pan out.
That also did not happen. Yes.
And it's a coverless comic, it's just the same paper stock on the cover.
And I should also point out, there was one of the things that I mean, you know, the oldest of us was like 26 or 27, and we were all male, and we had been all lured into these two little houses because Tim was telling us that there were hot girls at this college, and there were like big orgy things that were going on every day, and
This was at East Lansing, so you were on Ottawa Street. Right?
Yeah.
How far was the campus from where you guys were?
I think Tim took me there twice for us to sell dope there, and
Did you make any money? Come on.
I tell you this.
he did. He made quite a lot of money. We got to eat for another I think 2 or 3 weeks with that, and so we were. It was.
Well, it was your foundational experience with
Well, yeah, it's like
inking and illustrating T. Casey Brennan and
and being
strong
taught how to
relation-
ink by Mike Nestovich, who
This-
was really, really good at this.
I was gonna say, the strong relationships you built with creators like Papinis, you were ready. You had a thorough grounding in all aspects.
It took me 4 or 5 years to convince them that I wasn't in on the theft of their first issue.
So
That was fun.
I pulled up this slide. This is just as a contrast to the urban landscape. You completely went full bucolic, rural wilderness with your work. And of course, the other thing about your work that struck me, I don't think I knew. Well, I barely knew what an underground comic was, but I also barely knew what Will Eisner was. But I did know enough that you were in the school of Will Eisner as opposed to Neil Adams or Jack Kirby, which were the big things at the time. And I thought that was very original of you to steal Eisner instead of stealing
somebody else.
like
yeah.
Rich Buckler was doing Kirby and so forth. But why did you gravitate to that influence? I'm sure you've told this story many times.
Well, I think the whole thing was I had seen the Spirit as an underground. I had seen him as And then I saw him as the kitchen sink editions.
Okay.
So, whereas Joe Zabel was, was really in the, Rich Corbin, school, and really could explicate what was happening with light sources. And it took me the longest time to realize what he was doing. So he trained me in light sources and,
Like, for example, on here on the nose, you've got a cast shadow and a reflected.
and a reflected light. But I didn't know that was why it was like that. I didn't realize that was actually a reflected light coming underneath the nose. I just knew that was what you did with noses. Took me a long time to figure that out.
And this is what you do with bandages?
That's right.
Or material. So how long do we have this room, by the way? Do we have to be out of here? Somebody come in and...
Actually, I don't think anyone's coming in here afterwards, so technically we go to 4:30, but if you guys wanna go.
Well, I thought I would, open it up. I'm tired of hearing myself talk. I do this at
Oh,
college.
you
classrooms,
too,
but-
huh?
Yes. You too. Does anyone have any questions they wanna ask Bill about his surrounding? And of course, we haven't mentioned his, latest magnum opus, 45 years of
Published work.
Here you are.
But sort of spasmodically stopping and starting during that 25 years. Because among other things, I would like start on a project and then DC would call and say, oh, well, the editor was fired. And so, I guess you can't do anything anymore because your editor is gone.
Oh, you too.
Yeah, it was,
Who got fired while you, Mike Gold or?
well, Mike Gold left, Brian Augustin went off to become an incredibly successful, freelancer, as did, Mark Wade, and then,
Kupperberg?
Kupperberg, actually, if you ever saw on the, News of the World, tabloid that they used to have on the, he was the creator of Monkey Boy. And yes, so they just kept firing editors for no good reason, sort of spasmodically.
And then the new editor would want a new team.
Yeah, and that, you know, even on my successful work, I mean, I went through, what, 4 editors, 5 editors on Wonder Woman?
Really?
And if you look at the sine curve for the plots that I was doing on Wonder Woman, it would be like, like that. It was like I was, you know, epileptic or something.
Did they just want you to move on to the next?
They would, yeah, and then the new editor would come on, and like the new editor, for example, I was hired on the fact that I had done some interesting things when I was writing Dr. Fate, and I had Wonder Woman as a guest star on Dr. Fate, and so when I did, I sent, because it wasn't so much that I disliked what George Perez was doing on Wonder Woman. It was more like George had a lot of pull, because he was like, you know, not only writing but drawing half the books in the market, and so, you know, if he wanted to have real honest to God lesbian Amazons, then he did, and most of that was really successful. And when he finally when he finally had to leave because he was just exhausted, I went to, and they asked me to take over. I thought, well, you know, there's like 1,000 characters in this drama. There's all the people in Boston, and all the Amazons in Thermoscria, and it's like, maybe I'll cut myself a little space here. So I sent Wonder Woman into space, and turned her into a space pirate, and then I turned her into Captain Blood, and then I turned her into Spartacus, and everybody liked that except for that was the editor, and then that editor was fired, and so then the new editor said, well, let's bring her back right now, because, and I remember this very, very well, he said, I don't understand why she's doing science fiction things out in space. Why isn't she, Superman is science fiction, Wonder Woman is fantasy. And he's saying it like it was all done in capital letters, you know. One of these, and every editor has some sort of hard and fast rule. And that's the reason that DC was kept out of the big time for so many years. Because, you know,
Did
you don't
he
have-
realize that he was talking